here is right in the back there, Barb, hiding. We've got two different groups here today. If you're interested in volunteering, getting out there a little bit more, we have the American Red Cross. We also have our amateur radio group, which really helps us out a lot during emergencies. And we've got Jim here from the National Weather Service, who's going to go over the SKYWARN class with you. Go over some housekeeping stuff in the back of the room. We have waters for you, provided by the library. Doug Morrison was kind enough to set all this up for us. There's spring water to your left, and there's purified water to your right, whichever your preference is. Bathrooms, if you go out to the front doors, go to the left through the sliding glass doors. The bathrooms are right on the left. So if you have to go at any time during the presentation, please just excuse yourself quietly and make your way back when you're done. Anyways, we're going to go ahead and get started. This is a really, really important service that you can help us provide. We really rely on this a lot from our different folks across the county that do this. We have a Wayne County SKYWARN Storm Spotter Facebook page that you can request admission to. And we also have one for the Emergency Management Agency. I look to this a lot because, especially after a storm, a lot of times I can see where the real big issues were just by looking at that page, because we've got so many people across the county that participate. So you'll get a real good idea of what's going on. So without any further ado, no one likes ado, Jim, and if you guys have any questions or anything, just let us know.
All right, thank you. Can you guys hear me all right? Yeah. All right, yeah, just a couple of things. We'll have a break halfway through, and there'll be time at the end. If you registered online, we've printed out the list of registration. If you didn't check your name off when you came in, you can do that either at the break or at the end. And if you're not on one of those lists, we have a registration form. We just want to make sure everyone here gets credit for it and is in the system. And we also have these two handouts on the table. I think everyone got one, but if you didn't get a handout, they're up there and grab one at any time. So yeah, we're here to talk about SKYWARN. So here's kind of what we're going to be going over tonight. We're going to briefly talk about our office at the National Weather Service in Cleveland. We're going to talk about why we need you, and then the rest of it really is going to be information for you, so you can kind of know when bad weather is coming and know how to report it to us if you see anything. So our mission at the National Weather Service, the biggest mission is the protection of life and property. There's also a clause about strengthening the national economy in there. So we do forecasts for airports and things like that, and any sort of an outdoor event, they might be making decisions based on like severe weather watches, warnings, and advisories in place. At our office, we have about 25 people. 14 of them are forecasters like I am. We have techs, we have managers and hydrologists and people who maintain equipment all across our area. So it adds up to about 25 people, but 14 of us are keeping a continuous watch on the weather 24/7, 365. And we are the ones who issue severe thunderstorm, flood, tornado warnings, winter storm warnings, stuff like that. Luckily, not too many winter storm warnings this winter. There's 122 offices like us across the United States and U.S. territories. So there's a Weather Service office in Guam, in Puerto Rico, and even in the American Samoa, along with all over the lower 48, Alaska, and Hawaii. And most offices are laid out pretty similarly to ours in Cleveland. So that is what our ops floor looks like. We have 8 workstations that look like that. They all have 5 computer monitors. And we have a situational awareness display that we call it. It's that big screen in the middle. So we can put on like live news coverage. We can put on webcams or live streams of people who are out there maybe looking at these things. So kind of helps speed up the flow of information into our office. And we're all in the same room. And during severe weather, there can be 9 or 10 of us in there. So the building can get a little bit top heavy. So here is our coverage area. It's all the blue there in Northeast Ohio, and then the 2 counties in Northwest Pennsylvania. And there's all our surrounding Weather Service offices. So every county touching Wayne County is covered by us in Cleveland. But if you go down towards Coshocton, Tuscarawas County, that would be Pittsburgh. You also have Wilmington, Northern Indiana, Charleston, West Virginia, covering parts of Ohio. But we're responsible for 30 counties in northern Ohio and northwestern Pennsylvania.
Is that map published somewhere on the website?
It should be on our website somewhere, yes. Not entirely sure where, but, and then here's another view of our coverage area. So yeah, everywhere from I-75 to Erie, Pennsylvania, and down towards Lake Marion. So we're gonna kind of get into why we need spotters. So the radar data that we get is good, but it's not perfect for a number of reasons. A lot of times we're issuing severe thunderstorm or tornado warnings based on what we're seeing on radar. We might have a pretty good idea, but research has found that warnings that have confirmation either from a trained spotter like you or from an emergency manager or whoever the source may be, if there's someone under the storm saying, yeah, this storm's producing golf ball sized hail and we can broadcast that out to everyone, research has found that people tend to take those warnings more seriously, especially tornado warnings, where someone sees a tornado as opposed to radar indicated. So, not only do you help us issue better warnings, but you help our warnings kind of have a greater impact on the public when we're trying to get them out of harm's way. So, kind of into why radar, it's very good, but it's not perfect. Radar displays a number of things on the upper right, or upper left, pardon me. That's what we call reflectivity. That's your basic radar. If you turn on the 5 o'clock news and they show where it's raining, where it's snowing, it's that product. And obviously it looks a little more imposing when there's severe thunderstorms out there. And on the bottom, that's what we call velocity. It tells us how quickly the wind is blowing towards or away from the radar. It's how we can see things like damaging winds or rotation in a thunderstorm. This is obviously very good, but one downside is the Earth is not flat. So the farther you get from the radar, the higher up the beam is scanning. So here in Wayne County, I think the radar beam is like 2,000 or 3,000 feet up, which relatively speaking is pretty good. You're fairly close to the radar in Cleveland, but there still is that very critical layer between 2,000 or 3,000 feet up and what you're experiencing on the ground, where having spotters can help us fill in that gap. And then another limitation is the farther you get from the radar, the features get a little bit fuzzier just because the radar beam, it naturally spreads out. So here's an example of that. The storm kind of in the middle there on the left, you can see a really nice, well-defined hook echo. It's right next to the radar. The next storm, you can obviously see that it's a pretty large thunderstorm, but it's a little blurrier. So the farther you get from the radar, it's not that it isn't helpful, but it's not quite as good. So getting that ground truth, it can really help us when we're deciding to issue warnings or not issue warnings. And once we have a warning out, getting ground truth can help people take it a little bit more seriously. So here's an example of a tornado warning where spotters reported a funnel cloud. So we issued a tornado warning and it says right in the warning, spotters reported a funnel cloud. So it's not radar indicated, it's someone sees it, it's happening, and that tends to get people to take better action. And a big reason is when we receive these reports, we are blasting them out to all our different what we call partners. So TV meteorologists, emergency management, dispatch centers, anyone who is responsible for helping warn people or perhaps recover things once damage occurs. We're sending out storm reports we get from the spotters or anyone else to those people. So the more reports we get, the more consistent that message is. And it's easier for the TV people as well to get up there and say, hey, spotters are reporting hail this size or down trees or a tornado, as opposed to just showing things on radar. So being able to tell the audience that there is severe weather ongoing under that storm, it strengthens their message on TV as well. So a good spotter knows, and we're going to go through all of this, obviously how to be safe and how to be aware of the weather that's coming. Also, you'll know what to look for, and we'll show you quite a few pictures of thunderstorm clouds that may or may not be concerning, and also how to effectively submit reports. So we'll kind of start with some terminology that you probably hear a lot in the summer. We'll start with watches. So when there are thunderstorms coming, we may issue a severe thunderstorm watch, we may issue a tornado watch, or maybe we'll issue a flood watch if we think that heavy rain and flooding are a concern. And all these watches basically mean is that conditions are conducive for that over maybe the next several hours. It's kind of like, we're putting a watch out, we think there will be severe thunderstorms in the general area maybe through this evening or whatever the situation is. So it's less serious than a warning, it just kind of means, be prepared for whatever the watch is. So severe thunderstorm watches are usually issued if we're thinking storms will produce damaging winds or maybe large hail or maybe a low tornado risk, whereas a tornado watch is issued when we think there's greater potential for a tornado. So in a common year, you probably get several severe thunderstorm watches and maybe around here 1 or 2 tornado watches. And then a flood watch, and that can be issued at the same time as one of the other kinds of watches. It's sort of separate. It means we think there might be heavy rain that can cause flooding. And that can occur along with severe thunderstorms or even with non-severe thunderstorms. So once you hear that a warning of some sort has been issued, that's a more serious situation. So if we issue a warning for your area, that means we think that a thunderstorm producing some of these things is heading, either right towards you or very close to you. So that's much more of a, call to action, take shelter, whereas a watch is kind of like, be on the lookout, there might be some bad weather. A warning means it's coming and it's coming pretty soon. So a severe thunderstorm warning is issued if we think a thunderstorm is capable of producing damaging winds, and we define that as 58 miles an hour or more. That's usually the point where things like trees start coming down more easily, or where you might start getting like shingles or siding blown off homes. Hail greater than or equal to 1 inch in diameter, so that's about the size of a quarter or bigger. Anything higher than that is considered a severe thunderstorm. A tornado warning is issued if we're either seeing strong rotation on radar, or if someone is telling us that they're seeing rotation underneath a thunderstorm. So basically, a tornado warning is issued if we think a tornado can develop at any time or perhaps is already ongoing. And a flash flood warning is issued, again, if it looks like heavy rain, maybe oversaturated soil is falling and quickly running off, and things like streams and creeks and areas of poor drainage might have very rapidly rising water. And flash flooding can occur pretty quickly, and it's especially hazardous at night. So obviously severe thunderstorms get all the excitement, but flash flooding, especially at night, is also pretty dangerous. And that's also something that we encourage people to report to us. So, and here's the funnel of how severe weather preparedness goes. So when a severe weather threat is maybe 2, 3, 4 days away, you might see us posting on Facebook, and a lot of times our emergency management partners, along with the broadcast meteorologists, they'll allude to it as well. They'll say we're kind of outlooked for severe weather. There's a risk for severe weather on this day. And that's kind of like a vague region where there might be severe weather. So that's kind of like the farthest out, the least serious. But as we get to the day of, that's when we might issue those watches. Usually we try to issue watches maybe a couple to a few hours before severe weather comes in. So once a watch is issued, it's a little more serious. The threat is starting to come into focus. Once we issue the warning, that's when we think the bad weather is coming to your area in the immediate future. And research has shown, especially in things like tornadoes, seconds can save lives. So when we're putting out information for something like a very severe thunderstorm or a tornado warning, getting timely information out there, including spotter confirmation of a tornado or whatever we're issuing the warning for, it can nudge people to take shelter. And sometimes they get there just in the nick of time. So we're kind of move into your role as a spotter. So before severe weather comes, if we expect organized severe weather, we'll probably issue a severe thunderstorm or tornado watch. If it's a hot summer day and there's like one severe thunderstorm in the broad region, you're probably not going to get a watch for that. But if we're thinking there's going to be several severe thunderstorms in the general region, that's probably when you start getting a watch. And when a watch is in effect, that you as a spotter, that's kind of your cue to be on the lookout for severe weather and kind of be ready to report it if you see it. But again, it doesn't mean it's coming yet. It kind of means maybe over the next few hours, ones coming. And this is an unusually large severe thunderstorm watch, but it's an example of, a watch is highlighting a broad area to kind of be on the lookout. So once we issue the warning is coming. You as a trained spotter are under absolutely no obligation to go out and try and film this thunderstorm, drive towards it, chase it. And there are people who do that, but we want you to be safe. So we want you to stay inside away from windows, and if it's a tornado warning, take shelter in the lowest floor in an interior room. We don't want you seeking out stuff to report. If you see something, report it to us when it's safe. Don't put yourself in harm's way to see if the tornado warning really has a tornado. We want you to take shelter, and then if you see a tornado, let us know when it's safe. So warning means it's coming, and we encourage you to take your normal preparedness action. And again, with a tornado warning, that's, kind of the next level. Take shelter in a middle room, lowest floor, away from windows, as many walls between you and the wind as possible, and you want to stay there until the warning expires, which means the tornado threat is ended. So after, again, we don't want you putting yourselves in harm's way to report stuff to us. So if a nasty thunderstorm does come through and there's flooding or there's still lightning or maybe down power lines or other damage, keep yourself safe before you try to report your severe weather to us. And just obviously it's very rare we get weather that's quite that significant, but it can happen around here every once in a while. And just be aware that after the most severe storms, a lot of times there are still hidden dangers out there even after you come out of your shelter. So, discussing real quickly here where to find some of this information. So, a lot of times when the Storm Prediction Center, they're the ones who actually issue the national severe weather outlooks that you might see us sharing on our Facebook or Twitter. You might see emergency management or broadcast meteorologists sharing these as well if they include our area. They come from the Storm Prediction Center's website, and if you're curious to seek these out on your own, the web address is www.spc, that's the Storm Prediction Center.noaa.gov. And it's also linked on our homepage, which is weather.gov/CLE. And if you click on the Convective Outlook tabs, you can see that day's National Convective Outlook, and these outlooks are categorized by risk level. So this next slide, I believe, has what these risk level means. So here in the northern half of Ohio, a majority of our severe weather risk days are going to be either a marginal or a slight risk. So if you look on this map, that would be the dark green or the yellow. And that means that maybe isolated to scattered severe weather is possible. And this is a majority of our severe weather threats are either a marginal or a slight. So it doesn't mean everyone's going to see the worst storm of their lives that day, but it does mean a few places might get a nasty storm. Once you get on the right side, the enhanced, the moderate, the high, that's a little bit less common around here. And that's when kind of our attention is a little bit higher. Like this might be one of the worst severe weather events of the summer. So once you get up there, that's where we're thinking more widespread severe weather is possible. That's where we think more destructive severe weather is possible. So this day, this was 2021, and in the moderate risk area, touched down right around here and tracked into Kentucky. I don't know if any of you remember the Mayfield, Kentucky tornadoes from December of 2021. That was this day, and that occurred in a moderate risk. Unfortunately, a number of people lost their lives. So once we see those enhanced risks, and especially the moderates or heaven forbid a high, that really gets our attention up that this is probably a more significant day than normal. And if you dive further into this SPC outlooks, they actually break it down by wind risk, tornado risk in the middle, and then hail risk on the far side. So this is actually the outlook that was issued. I don't know if any of you remember last June 13th, we had some really nasty thunderstorms come through, and they really clipped just kind of western and southern Wayne County They really crushed like Holmes County just to the south. But this was the outlook for that day, and there was a moderate risk for Western Ohio. It was an enhanced risk for wind in our area. And you can see they were really highlighting the wind threat that day, and we did have some very widespread wind damage. I don't think it quite got to Worcester, but it was just a few miles southwest of here, so it was very close. And then that was our most widespread event of the summer. The Storm Prediction Center, if you poke around on their website, they also issue what are called mesoscale convective discussions. These are kind of like in addition to a watch. So the one on this side is an example of one they issued when they were getting ready to issue a watch. And then the one on the far side, that was actually one they issued while that event last June was ongoing, that I was just talking about. So sometimes we'll tweet these out or post them on Facebook just as kind of an additional heads up. And you don't really need to know what those are, but if you do see us post those, that's what they are. It's kind of an additional source of information on top of the regular watches. So moving on briefly to flash flooding stuff. This is a little bit less well known, I would say, than the thunderstorm outlooks I was just talking about, but the Weather Prediction Center, the WPC as they're called, they issue outlooks for flash flood risk as well. A very similar line of thinking to the severe weather risk, where they kind of highlight general areas where they think there is an elevated risk for flash flooding. So this could be another good kind of situational awareness tool as we get into that time of year. And a lot of times we will actually email these out to our core partners, including emergency managers, if there is kind of a elevated risk of flash flooding. So moving on to our website. So this is what our homepage looks like on a pretty quiet day. The map isn't lit up. And there's a few different things we're going to point out, and it's these two things here. Under current hazards, there's a tab, and if you scroll over it, you get options for local outlook and graphical hazardous weather outlook. So the local outlook is just a text product, and we update it at least once a day. And in that text product, it'll list any watches, warnings, or advisories that are in effect for the area. So in this instance, there was a flood watch out. And then if there's anything big coming up over the next week, we'll also generally put that in there. So if there is an organized risk for severe weather coming, or maybe a larger winter storm coming, we'll put that in there. So that's kind of a more localized heads up if you don't want to navigate through the Storm Prediction Center website. We update that every day, and if there's nothing too crazy coming, it'll say no hazardous weather is expected at this time, and that kind of means we're not expecting anything too crazy. And then here's what the graphical hazardous weather outlook, there's kind of a matrix of different things, and if you click on a day for that parameter, it'll show you what the risk is or what the threat is, and if you mouse over it, it'll tell you what the risk levels mean. So this is updated every time we update the forecast. So this might be good at looking for things like thunderstorm potential, up to a week out, because we do generate thunderstorm forecasts. If there's a chance of thunderstorms, it'll light up this map. And once we get closer in, it also pulls in those Storm Prediction Center outlooks and highlights our area and the various risks. So that's off our homepage, and that might be an easier place to go if you're just looking for real localized information and you don't want to kind of thumb through the national outlooks from the Storm Prediction Center. And another good way to get weather information is still the NOAA weather radio. So if you have a smartphone, a lot of times you can get kind of the same information on there, but if you don't have a smartphone, or if you're ever caught anywhere where you might not have a cell connection or an internet connection, NOAA weather radio is still kind of your most reliable option. I know up on Lake Erie, a lot of boaters still use these, and I know a lot of outdoor venues, they still have these. And what's nice about these is you can't just turn them on and get your local forecast out to 5 or 7 days, but if you don't want it on, just playing nonstop, you can program it to just make a lot of noise. We call it tone. It'll make a lot of noise if a warning is issued for your area. So if you only want to know about something like a tornado warning, you can program it so it just sits there quietly. But if a tornado warning is issued for your area, it'll make a bunch of noise and get your attention. So again, that's a very reliable option. We constantly do maintenance on these and quickly repair them if they go down. So it is meant to be constantly broadcasting and always there. The National Weather Service, we do not have an app, but there are some apps through some other government agencies that can send you push notifications for watches and warnings. So FEMA has an app that'll do that, as does the Red Cross. And these will push notifications to your phone, and I know for some of them you can set a certain number of locations. So, maybe if you want to set one for work or home, or maybe somewhere where a family member lives and get a notification for that, you can. And then, so those are those two apps that you would have to search and download out of the App Store. They are free apps. But another option is wireless emergency alerts. So most new smartphones come with these already installed. So what these are is, they don't go off often, but if there's something like if we issue a tornado warning, or more significant flash flood warnings or severe thunderstorm warnings, it will actually push a notification to your phone telling you that your area is under a specific type of warning, and it'll also push things like Amber Alerts to your phone. So most smartphones that are less than 8 or so years old probably have this out of the box. You might have to click it on. And again, I think I've turned mine off before because it goes off for like an Amber Alert when I'm sleeping, but not bad, especially heading into severe weather season, to check and make sure they're on. It's just, it does it off your nearest cell tower, so if you're in the warning, it'll push it to your phone. If you're not in the warning, it won't, which is a very nice feature. Maybe say if you're driving and you're driving into an area where there's a tornado warning, your phone will go off as soon as you drive into there. So before we start moving on to thunderstorm ingredients and things to look for in thunderstorms, any quick questions about anything I've talked about so far, like how to get the weather information? Yes.
Well, I have a question actually on the hazardous weather reports.
Yeah.
Outlooks.
Mm-hmm.
I looked on those and click on it.
Yeah.
And it will say day 1, no hazardous weather expected this time. Day 2, no hazardous weather expected at this time.
Yeah.
What was the purpose of the report?
It's just updated every day. So that's just kind of it forces us to make sure we update it every day.
Okay, because it only comes on when there's hazardous weather, on your website.
Yeah, we have a button to push it to light up the website. We're supposed to click no if there's nothing on there. Maybe someone accidentally clicked yes, so it lit up the website. But yeah, we issue it every day. Usually if it's no hazardous weather, we turn off the option to light up the map, that tan color that you probably saw.
It's just a red lettering at the top, like you put in where I live, your zip code, and it pulls up the forecast. And then there's this red letters that if there's a hazard.
Yeah, that just meant that someone hit yes, because that's all that means. So we usually hit no if it's, like you said, nothing, but sometimes someone might just accidentally hit yes. Yes?
Yeah, I'd like to pull up your outlooks from your National Weather Service thing, and usually at the bottom there's a spotter activation statement.
Yes. That's a good point. In the hazardous weather outlook, we have an option, and we usually only do it if we're pretty confident there's going to be some active weather where it's called the spotter activation statement, and it'll usually say spotter activation not expected, but if we are expecting a pretty good risk of severe weather, either today or tonight, so within the first 24 hours, we will check on the option that says spotter activation is likely or expected. So that's another good point. Thank you for bringing that up. Another good place to look, and that's just it's right there. There it is. So again, on this day we weren't expecting it, and that's what it says most days. So on the rare occasion where it says spotter activation is expected, that means that we're pretty confident there's going to be stuff at least close by, if that makes sense. Okay. So moving on to some thunderstorm stuff, we kind kind of skipped winter this year, because it snowed a few times. But here in the northern half or so of Ohio, we average somewhere between about 35 and 45 days per year where there is thunder in the area. We might be a little bit closer to the 45 than the 35 where we are in Wayne County. So maybe a little over 10% of the days in a given year, there are thunderstorms in the area. A lot of them are crammed into like the late spring and summer months. There's always thousands of thunderstorms ongoing across the world. A relatively small proportion of them become severe. And again, we consider a thunderstorm severe when it produces hail, an inch in diameter or larger, or wind gusts in excess of 58, and or a tornado. So any of those things can make a thunderstorm severe. But again, a relatively small number of thunderstorms actually manage to do that. So there can be severe weather anywhere across the United States, even on the West Coast, even on rare occasions in Hawaii or Alaska. Tornado Alley is kind of the middle of the United States, but every once in a while we can get some pretty nasty stuff around here as well. So what does one need to get a thunderstorm? So you need the air to be unstable, or you need instability as we call it. And what that means is that it's very warm near the ground and it gets cold quickly as you go up. So warm air rises, so the warmer it is near the ground and the colder it is up above, the more instability you probably have. And that's why a lot of times in summer, you get your good thunderstorms after a good sunny day. If it's cloudy all day, it's kind of less common to get really big thunderstorms around here. You need a source of moisture, and that's to make the clouds and the rain and all the stuff that happens with a thunderstorm, and that's why a lot of times your humid days in the spring and summer have thunderstorms as opposed to your days where it's actually pleasant outside. And you need a source of lift, and what that is something to make the air go up, and it can be anything. It can be a front, like a cold front or a warm front. Up near Lake Erie, it can be what's called a lake breeze when cold air starts rushing inland off the lake. It can be air rushing out of an old thunderstorm. So sometimes thunderstorms develop, they collapse. As they collapse, air rushes out of them, and it acts as a source of lift that can cause other thunderstorms to develop. And sometimes that source of lift can just be air blowing over a hill because the air hits the hill, it has to go up. And sometimes that can cause thunderstorms to form. That's kind of what you need just to get your general thunderstorm. So any hot, humid summer day, a lot of times we'll have these in place. But to get the really big, severe thunderstorms, we need what's called wind shear. And that is when the wind changes in speed and direction as you go up through the atmosphere. And I'll explain why that's important here in a second. So there are different flavors of thunderstorms. Not all thunderstorms look alike. In fact, they can look quite different. So we're going to start with your really basic thunderstorm. It's what we call a ordinary or single cell thunderstorm. Other words for it might be pulse thunderstorm or maybe a popcorn thunderstorm. So these occur on your days, usually where it's hot and humid, but there's very little wind shear. So what happens is the thunderstorm develops, and when the thunderstorm develops, that warm, humid air rises, and it causes the clouds and eventually the thunderstorm to form. But what happens is, since there's no wind shear, as all the rain starts falling out of the thunderstorm, it literally falls on top of the rising air and cuts off the rising air and causes the thunderstorm to dissipate. So this is what happens when you don't have wind shear. You just get little pulse cells. They don't last too long, and they rain themselves out because there's no wind shear to keep the rising portion of the thunderstorm separate from the downward portion of the thunderstorm. So these types of thunderstorms are the most common. They're also the least severe. Every once in a while, these thunderstorms might produce very isolated, strong winds, maybe hail close to an inch in diameter. And since they don't move, they can produce locally heavy rain, but they're usually not our big severe weather producers. And again, a lot of times they don't even last an hour. So, if you happen to, get a nice open view, and there is some open country around here, that might be what a single cell thunderstorm looks like from a distance. It's just one thunderstorm, and and it's kind of sunny all around it, and it'll rain itself out pretty quickly. Here's an example of what single cell thunderstorms might look like on radar. This was a radar loop last summer. There were a number of thunderstorms this day. None of them were severe. And you can see how each individual thunderstorm kind of fires up. It lasts maybe a half hour or so, and then it starts raining itself out. And it's just hard to get real severe weather in situations like this. So this is kind of your typical popcorn thunderstorm day, what it might look like on radar. So moving up a little bit in terms of organization and potential severity, we're going to move from your single cell to what we call multi-cell clusters. And basically these happen on days where there's a little bit more wind shear. So when the thunderstorms start raining themselves out, they don't do it right on top of what we call the updraft. That's the rising portion of the thunderstorm. So they do still rain themselves out, but they don't do it quite as quickly. And when they do rain themselves out, that extra push of wind has a better chance of firing new thunderstorms. So I'll show you what that means on radar here in a second. But on days like this, where you start getting what we call clusters of thunderstorms, these aren't your big lines that might cover half the state. These are just kind of areas of thunderstorms. They might be a little bit more severe in terms of producing some damaging wind or some hail. And it may be a very low tornado risk. These clusters they can be pretty significant rain producers because a lot of times you get multiple thunderstorms in the same area and you get a lot of rain very quickly. So this might be what a cluster of multi-cell thunderstorms, as we call it, looks like. It's basically a group of single cells. So you have new thunderstorms in front, and then you have old thunderstorms kind of tailing behind it that are raining themselves out. It's a little bit more organized, so a little bit more potential for severe weather, but it still is nothing crazy. I would say a lot of our severe weather days, a lot of our marginal risk, or maybe our slight risk days, are days where you kind of have multi-cell clusters. So a little bit more organization than your regular pulse thunderstorms, a little bit more wind shear usually is why they're more organized, but it's still not your extreme outbreak. So this might be what multi-cell clusters look like on radar. There's definitely more organization to these than the prior radar loop, but we're still not seeing big squall lines racing across the area. We're just kind of seeing somewhat more organized groups of cells moving across the area. So when you see multi-cell clusters coming in, you're probably looking at maybe some damaging winds, maybe some hail right around quarter size, but usually not too much more severe than that. Now, ramping up a little bit more, if there's more wind shear, stronger winds aloft, or maybe something like a strong cold front to help organize the thunderstorms, that's where you go from more of a cluster to more of a squall line scenario. So once you see a solid squall line coming in, that's usually when things can be more severe, especially in terms of damaging winds. So that large thunderstorm event last June that got part of Wayne County with some pretty significant wind damage, that was one of these. And these storms also can produce their heavy rain and also occasionally a spin-up tornado. So this is just usually more wind shear or something like a front to organize things more than your cluster days. So this might be what you see as one of these more organized squall lines come in. This is what's called a shelf cloud, and we'll go into much more detail on that after the break. But a lot of times when you get a line of thunderstorms coming in, the air rushing out of it will cause that shelf cloud to develop, and that's usually a pretty good signal that it's going to get windy if you see a sky like that coming at you. So here is a pretty high-end example of what these multi-cell squall lines can look like. This is from last June, so June 13th into June 14th, and this day the atmosphere, to use kind of a technical term, was loaded. Because there were 3 different clusters that came through, and it was this middle cluster. It just clipped Wayne County and produced a lot of wind damage in the southern portion of the county. It was that middle cluster that did a lot of damage. But all 3 of these clusters were at least somewhat severe across our area. So when you see radars like this, where you see very solid, organized lines, and especially, as you know, this one and the next one, they take on a bowing shape as they're coming through. When you see lines, especially that are bowing out, that's a pretty good indication that you have a pretty elevated threat for damaging winds. And all those yellow boxes that pop up and a couple of red boxes, yellow are severe thunderstorm warnings and red are tornado warnings. So as you can see, the whole line was under severe thunderstorm warning. And at one point there were a couple of tornado warnings in here. I'll let it go one more time. And there were actually a few very short-lived tornadoes with this line in Holmes County. So those really intense line of storms, the biggest risk is damaging winds, straight line winds, but occasionally you can get a brief tornado with it as well. So moving from the clusters and the lines to what's relatively rare around here, the supercell thunderstorm. So this is the rarest type of thunderstorm around here, but it has the potential to be the most severe in terms of tornadoes and hail. So in the United States, most significant tornadoes or most very large hail, we'll say hail that's like bigger than golf ball size, it comes from a supercell thunderstorm. So supercell thunderstorms are thunderstorms where the entire updraft, the entire portion of the storm where air is rising into it is actually rotating. And that rotation is what gives it the higher tornado risk and also the greater hail potential. So there's usually maybe just a few days a year where we get true supercells here in the northern half of Ohio, but when we get them, they can produce any type of severe weather, anything from damaging winds and hail, or even heavy rain to tornadoes. So here's an example of what a supercell thunderstorm might look like on radar. So the big characteristic with supercells is they have what's called a hook echo, and that's from the air literally rotating around the rotating updraft. So this storm has a very pronounced hook echo down here, and this might be what, say if you were maybe out here looking towards it, what you might see. You might see what's called a wall cloud, and again, we'll talk much more about what that means after the break. You might see a wall cloud underneath it if you're looking at it from in front. So if you ever see a hook echo in a thunderstorm on radar, know that it might be a supercell, and those are the storms that produce the most intense tornadoes and the largest hail. And again, luckily they're fairly rare around here. So before I quickly get into some of the hazards associated with thunderstorms, any quick questions about the types of thunderstorms? Yes?
Not really about the type of, what is the definition of a brief spin up?
The word brief spin up is controversial because the reason we don't like it is it can imply that it's less significant. So a brief spin up is kind of a slang we use for a very short-lived tornado. So we might use that on a day where there is a squall line. And so that derecho, that last June, those tornadoes in Holmes County, we might have called them brief spin-ups because the whole line of storms was producing straight line winds, but then just for a few minutes, those couple of tornadoes developed within it. That's usually what we mean, or if you hear someone on TV say brief spin-up, they usually mean a short-lived tornado in a larger line of storms.
And short duration or develop quicker.
Yeah, honestly, it's usually both. Usually, and so they're hard for us to issue warnings on sometimes because they can happen in a few minutes. But yeah, quick spin-up does not mean it can't do damage. Yes.
You just said with the supercells that tornadoes are most likely in the largest tail. Are there multiple tails in those supercells?
No. I think what I meant to say is that supercells, they tend to produce the strongest tornadoes. Usually if there is a tornado in a supercell, it's kind of where the hook echo runs into the rest of the storm. If you can, like, so right around where that kind of square would be, or trapezoid would be. So usually somewhere right in there, if there is a tornado with a supercell, it would kind of be where the hook echo connects to the rest of the storm. And yes.
Last June, you said that came through the straight line winds?
Yeah.
We're in Ashley County.
Oh yeah, so you got it, yeah.
Was it straight line winds or was there an active tornado in that part?
I'm trying to remember where the tornadoes were. I know we definitely had one that tracked, out of Knox into Holmes County. There was one more, I can't remember if it was Ashland or if it was a little farther south.
It was Knox to Holmes.
Yeah.
It was through Frederick, it was north of Fredericktown, it was in that Fredericktown.
Yeah.
Area.
What about Possum Run?
Yeah.
Yeah, people like.
Walker Hill, Washington.
I would, honestly, I can look during the break at where, I can pull up where those were. I don't remember off the top of my head where the second one is. There was definitely one where he said there was a second one. It might have been, I'm trying to remember, but
We're from Richland County and we were told that there was one just up the road.
there might have been. What I'll do, I'll pull it up during the break, and just to see where it is. You might be right. I honestly don't remember. All right. So real quickly, so this is the last little segment before the much anticipated, the vaunted break. So we're going to talk about what makes a thunderstorm severe real quickly. So we already touched on this. A thunderstorm is severe if it produces winds in excess of 58 miles an hour or hail larger than an inch in diameter or a tornado. But along with that, thunderstorms can also produce lightning, which can be just as deadly, along with flooding. So we're going to start with the most common risk with severe thunderstorms around here. Usually if we get a severe thunderstorm around here, it's because it's producing damaging straight line winds. So what this means is it's just air or outflow rushing out of a thunderstorm in one direction. Usually straight line wind damage, it's more widespread than tornadoes. So tornadoes, they usually are small and very focused and intense, whereas straight line winds, the winds typically aren't quite as strong, although in rare instances they can get up to tornado-like wind speeds, but usually they're less extreme and more widespread than tornadoes. So this is typical straight line wind damage, trees, power lines coming down. That's usually the most common damage with damaging straight line winds around here. And so more specific types of straight line winds are what we call downbursts. So this happens when rain-cooled air falling out of a thunderstorm hits the ground and it can hit it pretty hard. And when that happens, the air spreads out and it can do so at speeds strong enough to cause damage. So this is actually, I'm going to get a pencil here to add to my reach. This is a picture, if you can, contrast is kind of poor, but this is actually a picture of a downburst in progress. So what you have is this part of the thunderstorm where all the rain and all the rain-cooled air is falling out and rushing towards the ground. It hits the ground and then fans out. So that's why you can kind of see the rain curtains kind of fanning in this direction along the ground. And usually damaging straight line winds are due to one or multiple downbursts in a thunderstorm rushing to the ground and then spreading out. So in that derecho last June, it was literally a nonstop series of very intense downbursts that kept that system going through the area. So on rare occasion, downburst winds can be upwards of 100 miles an hour. And with that derecho last summer from extreme southwestern Wayne County into a good portion of western Holmes, we figured winds were probably over 100 with the straight line portion just because trees were leveled everywhere, which is like snapped completely, which is very hard to do. So a term that you may hear once in a while on TV is microburst. That's just a downburst occurring over a relatively small area. And then a macroburst is a downburst occurring over a larger area, more than 2.5 miles. So we would classify the straight line portion of last summer's derecho as a macroburst. If you just have kind of like a small individual thunderstorm that produces wind damage in a small area, that's probably more of a microburst. And again, usually straight line winds are due to a combination of downbursts. So sometimes when we get bad damage, we need to figure out, was it straight line like a downburst or was it a tornado? And a key tell is how stuff is blown down by the wind. So with straight line winds, especially with a downburst, we notice that the wind generally blows in one direction and it usually spreads apart from a common point. So in this image, the downburst probably kind of went right along here, and you can see the trees are blown down away from that. Whereas with a tornado, it would be the opposite. Everything would be blown towards a common point because tornadoes suck air into them. So again, touched on this briefly. The most organized straight line wind is in a derecho, and that's or a squall line, and that's when there's a lot of wind shear or something strong like a front to organize the thunderstorms. And that's when the most widespread wind damage occurs. Every once in a while, these derechos or squall lines can produce some hail, but damaging winds are the main concern with them. And again, one more time, here's what a derecho looks like on the radar. And derecho, before I said the word derecho today, how many of you have heard that word before? Okay, so it's a pretty common word. I know they say it on TV every once in a while. It's actually a relatively strict definition. The line of thunderstorms needs to produce wind damage over a swath at least 240 miles long. The winds need to be severe, so 58 or higher, continuously along the path. And there need to be multiple points where the winds in that line are 75 miles an hour or higher. So again, what hit Wayne County, and especially just to the west and south last summer, that was a derecho. It was a relatively bona fide derecho, one of the strongest ones we've seen in Ohio in probably about a decade. And these were the resulting damage reports from that derecho. So it started all the way in the northern Chicago suburbs, and it went into West Virginia. So it lasted more than long enough. Any orange icon, if it has like this is a tree. So any orange icon that has kind of this green thing in it, that is wind damage, usually down trees or power lines. The other orange icons are measured wind gusts in excess of 58 miles an hour. The purple icons are hail. The red are tornadoes. So, and this tornado here, that might be pretty close to Possum Run Road. And I'll pull that up during the break. So, I mean, this was a classic high-end squall line where it produced a lot of wind, a little bit of hail, and a few brief tornadoes, but the wind was the most widespread. And the green icons are flooding, so there was some localized flooding with it as well. Hail, relatively uncommon around here to get huge hail, but hail occurs when the upward moving or upward blowing air in a thunderstorm called the updraft suspends water droplets above the freezing level long enough for them to freeze and then grow into hail before they fall out. So the stronger the updraft, the larger the hail can get. By the time you're getting like baseball-sized hail, which is not unprecedented, but very rare around here, once you're getting hail that big, the updraft in the thunderstorm is blowing up. It's stronger than 100 miles an hour. So hail, it can be very damaging. You know, once you get quarter-sized or larger, it can dent your car, it can damage your roof, your siding, stuff like that. And then obviously tornado is probably the most intense hazard possibly associated with a thunderstorm. Tornado, it means that there is a rapidly rotating column of air stretching from the ground to the thunderstorm. Usually there's about 1,200 of these annually across the United States, usually in our forecast area, northern Ohio, northwestern Pennsylvania. In an average year, we have about 6. Some years it's 0, 1, or 2. Rare years we get a bigger outbreak, we might have 20 or 30. So it can vary quite a bit, but usually about 6 per year in our forecast area. And tornadoes are rated based on the damage they produce. We rate them on a scale from 0 to 5. It's the EF scale that stands for Enhanced Fujita. The large majority of tornadoes are what we would call weak tornadoes. And again, weak doesn't mean they can't produce damage, but especially around here, a large majority of our tornadoes are EF0s or EF1s. So those tornadoes last summer with that line of storms, I believe they were all EF1s. But you can go all the way up to 2, 3, 4, or 5. There have been EF5 or F5 tornadoes in Ohio. The last time there was an F5 in Ohio was May 31st, 1989. It was 85 or 89. But it hit Niles, Ohio, near Youngstown. That was the last time we had an F5 in Ohio. But we have had EF4s as recently as 2019 near Dayton and 2010 near Toledo. So most of our tornadoes are 0s or 1s, but on rare occasions we can get into the most violent class. And here is tornado climatology where they happen. Texas has a significant advantage because of its size, but even with that said, it's the central United States that most commonly get tornadoes. But here in Ohio, we still can get our share. We average about 25 a year. So certainly something we need to be aware of. It's not like we're in Idaho where it's extremely rare here. We do average a fair number of tornadoes every year. And then beyond the really exciting stuff, the damaging winds, the hail, the tornadoes, flooding does not make a thunderstorm severe, but flooding can be very dangerous, especially flash flooding where the water rises very quickly. Again, thunderstorms on a humid day, if they're not moving too quickly, some spots may get 3, 4, or 5 inches of rain in a matter of a couple of hours, and that'll produce scenes like that. So the main thing to remember with flash flooding is turn around, don't drown, especially at night. There's no way of knowing how deep the water is, what the condition of the road is underneath that water. If you see water flying across a roadway, err on the side of not driving through it. So again, you can get this without a severe thunderstorm. If it's just a humid day or maybe it's been very wet lately, you can get flooding even if the thunderstorms aren't severe. And then the other hazard that kills almost as many people nationally as tornadoes every year is lightning. So lightning doesn't make a thunderstorm severe. Usually severe thunderstorms have more lightning than non-severe thunderstorms, but lightning on its own does not make a thunderstorm severe. So the reason lightning is kind of a sneaky hazard, and it's something to keep in mind if a storm ever goes through your area and you're coming out to see if there's any damage, is a lot of times when a thunderstorm is coming in, we say when thunder roars, go indoors. Once you can hear thunder, you're getting to the point where you're close enough to possibly be struck. But a lot of people, they wait until it starts raining. But a lot of times there's pretty close lightning before the rain starts driving people inside. So they have found that a lot of people, if they do get struck, they happen right as the thunderstorm's coming in, because they're trying to stay outside until the rain hits, or right as the thunderstorm moves away. So maybe the rain lightens, maybe you want to check and see if there's damage, if it was a really nasty thunderstorm, but there still can be lightning in the area. So this is why we don't necessarily want you rushing outside to take pictures of damage immediately after it happens, or why we don't really want you outside looking for severe weather, is because even if a tornado misses you, there can very much be lightning in the area. So we have reached the break.
There's always got to be somebody that interrupts the break time, right? Most of you that live nearby here know who I am. I'm Doug Hunter. I'm a captain of the Sheriff's Office. I oversee the patrol division there. And I want to say on behalf of the Sheriff's Office, Wayne County EMA, the Wayne County Library, thank you for being here. Because why this is important to us is we receive a lot of calls when severe weather comes into the area. And when we can get a group of people together like this and educate them on what they're actually seeing, it prevents a lot of false reports coming into the dispatch center and false reports coming into the National Weather Service. I'm also the emergency coordinator for the amateur radio group. You might have seen their table outside here. We have spotters on the air every time there's a weather alert that comes out. Our group gets on the radio, and when we talk about being a radio service, that's exactly what it is. You don't have to have an amateur radio to listen to our spotters reporting the activity from their home. All you need is a basic police scanner. Tune it to 147.21, and you'll be able to hear a group of anywhere from 10 to 30 people when these severe weather events take place, reporting activity throughout Wayne County, from West Salem to Doylestown to Shreve to Mount Eaton and all points in between. They're sharing things. Not storm chasers. They're not going out and chasing after the storms. They're reporting what's happening in their own neighborhoods. If you're interested in more of that, stop at the table here on the break. We'd love to have more people licensed and on the air, and we're more than happy to help you with that process. Thank you very much. And now it's break time.
And we'll reconvene maybe a couple minutes before 7:15. And yeah, as for the tornado question last summer, so we had 3 that night. One went from Morrow into Holmes, one went from Knox into Holmes, and one, you guys were correct, one from Richland into Ashland right along Possum Run Road. So we're going to very quickly recap locally and nationally weather from last year and then get into different clouds that you might see out there with thunderstorms. So here are all the quote-unquote billion-dollar weather events or disasters from last year in the United States. So any weather event where insured losses or property losses were estimated at more than $1 billion. You can see the central derecho June 13th right here that did clip parts of Wayne County, and that was $1 billion disaster. And also that pre-Christmas winter storm, it wasn't all that much snow, but it was a lot of wind and a lot of cold, and that was over $1 billion of damage over several states, especially up towards Buffalo. And then we're kind of our big thing here is the protection of life and property. So these are stats as of 2021, but believe it or not, typically heat is the biggest killer weather-related in this country in a given year. Things like tornado, hurricane, those can fluctuate depending on if you have a bad hurricane season or a bad tornado season. But usually heat leads the way, and usually flooding is second. So the tornadoes and hurricanes, they get all the attention and they are very damaging, but it's sometimes the more subtle things that get us. And I can say from last year, unfortunately, we're going to have, I think we have our stats from 2021 on there. So there were 8 weather-related fatalities in Ohio in 2021. Most of them were due to cold, which unfortunately isn't unheard of. And one was due to, it wasn't with a thunderstorm, it was just on a windy day, wind blew a tree down onto someone in Geauga County. That pre-Christmas storm in our area of responsibility, at the moment we're aware of at least 7 fatalities from that pre-Christmas winter storm last year. 4 of them were on the turnpike. There was a very, very significant pile up near Sandusky. And 3 of them were exposure fatalities from people who were caught without heat and those very cold temperatures. So, and here were the national severe weather reports last year. So the blue dots are wind reports, damage or measured gusts over 58. Red dots are tornadoes. Green dots are hail, 1 inch or larger. So this was pretty typical in our area where even in a quiet year, relatively speaking, severe weather-wise, because outside of that derecho event, we didn't have anything too crazy, but still had a nice scattering of wind reports, and usually damaging wind is our most common thunderstorm issue around here, if you will, followed by hail, followed by tornadoes. And here's a more zoomed-in version of Ohio. So same thing, the blue is wind, green is hail, red is a tornado. And I mentioned this right before break, but those of you in Richland and Ashland counties were correct. This red dot right here, that happened with that derecho. It spun up in Richland, moved into Ashland, and produced a whole bunch of straight line winds everywhere else. And pretty common for Ohio to have a fair amount of wind reports in a given year, a lesser number of hail reports, and then even fewer tornadoes. Last year was a slightly above average year in terms of number of tornadoes with 32 here in Ohio. And in Wayne County, no stranger to tornadoes since 1950. There have been 24 confirmed tornadoes in Wayne County, so about 1 every 3 years. They have all been EF2 or lower, so we can get those stronger, more violent tornadoes around here. We haven't had one in Wayne County yet, knock on wood. The most recent notable tornado was an EF2 tornado that touched down and moved through parts of the city of Worcester in September of 2010. I believe that produced a fair amount of damage to some businesses in Worcester. So that was the last significant tornado in the county, but any yellow line or dot that is an EF2 tornado in Wayne County. So F2s or EF2s are relatively intense. They can more or less destroy a majority of a home, and there have been several of those through the year, and that was the 2010 one highlighted or circled there. So we're going to move now on to identifying some clouds you may look at. So you're kind of going to have maybe the background based on if it's a single cell, a cluster, a line, or a supercell in terms of what you may expect. And this is what you may see at ground level as these things are coming in and how to identify them and what they mean. So all sorts of clouds we're going to talk about. We're obviously going to talk about tornadoes and funnel clouds and wall clouds. We're also going to talk about shelf clouds, like you might see when a squall line is coming in. And we'll also talk about what we call lookalikes, clouds that look low to the ground and scary but don't really mean much of anything. So now the big things to remember in general are the context of the clouds. If it's a cold, rainy day and you see clouds low to the ground, it's probably not a severe weather-related phenomenon, but if you have a big thunderstorm coming in, and you have a rotating cloud that's extending towards the ground, it's probably much more concerning. So we'll start with kind of our schematic of a supercell thunderstorm. Again, supercells produce a majority of intense tornadoes and the largest of hail in the country. They can also produce damaging straight line winds. Usually as a supercell's coming in, if you're going to see a wall cloud, it's going to be near the edge of the rain-cooled air. And it's going to be, the wall cloud itself a lot of times will be slanting towards the rain. And I'll show actual pictures of this that'll hopefully show it a little bit better. And if there is going to be a tornado, it'll usually drop down out of the wall cloud in a supercell thunderstorm. So, again, we already talked about this earlier, but a little more about supercells. Strong supercells, the winds can be blowing up in the updraft at over 100 miles an hour, and that's how you can get the very large hail. And supercells, they can produce straight line winds along with tornadoes and damaging winds. So onto clouds. So we're going to start with what's called a shelf cloud or a roll cloud. So these are relatively common around here. These are clouds that form on the leading edge of thunderstorms when chilly, rain-cooled air is rushing out of them. So they'll be on usually the leading edge of a thunderstorm. A lot of times it means gusty, perhaps even damaging winds are coming in along with heavy rain and maybe some hail. So if you see a shelf cloud with a thunderstorm, so if you see a wall cloud or tornado with a supercell, it'll kind of be between the rain-cooled air and the rest of the air getting sucked in. If you see a shelf cloud with a supercell, it'll be coming out of the rainy portion of the thunderstorm. And that's true with a shelf cloud with any type of storm. If you see a shelf cloud, it's usually going to be rushing away from where the rain is falling out of that thunderstorm. So how do shelf clouds form? They form when rain-cooled air rushes down and out the front of a thunderstorm. As that happens, it runs into warm and humid and unstable air just in front of the thunderstorm, and that's a lifting mechanism. It causes the air to rise, and as the air rises, it forms that cloud on the leading edge of the thunderstorm. So a shelf cloud is actually kind of the result of air rising back up into a thunderstorm, but it develops because air is rushing out of a thunderstorm. So there's that animation one more time, and the shelf cloud is in the middle. So shelf clouds are not a tornadic feature. So sometimes there will be a lot of turbulence in them. They might even look like they're rotating, but if you see rotation in a shelf cloud, it'll be kind of like this pencil on a horizontal axis. It'll kind of be like this, as opposed to a tornado where it'll be like this. So that's kind of your telltale sign that it's not tornadic. The rotation, it's on a horizontal axis, and it's not lowering towards the ground. And that rotation just happens because of the way the air initially rushes out and then rises back up. It can cause some slow rotation in the clouds, but it's not tornadic. So that's a shelf cloud. Every once in a while, as thunder, maybe the shelf cloud rushes well ahead of the thunderstorm or the initial thunderstorm falls apart. You could be left with what's called a roll cloud. It's basically a leftover shelf cloud that's not attached to a thunderstorm anymore. Roll clouds are very photogenic. They can look very imposing, but they're not really threatening. It's just basically an old shelf cloud. But they make for cool pictures. So in terms of identifying a shelf cloud versus maybe something that might be more tornadic, The key indication is they're going to be kind of on the leading edge of the rain, rushing away from the rain, and slanted away from the rain. So in this example, you see the shelf cloud coming right at us. It's right on the edge of the rain. It's rushing towards us away from the rain. That is a shelf cloud. And here's kind of another example of that. It's on the leading edge of all that dark color is rain falling out of the thunderstorm. And then you have the shelf cloud on the leading edge, and you can kind of see it slanted away from the rain. I think we have a side shot in here somewhere where you can see it a little bit better than that. But the key thing with shelf clouds is they won't be rotating on a vertical axis like a tornado would be. Any rotation, if there is any, would be on a horizontal axis. And they'll be on the leading edge of rain-cooled air. So shelf clouds might mean that strong, potentially damaging winds are coming, but usually they don't produce tornadoes. And so here's kind of a slightly better example. If you can kind of see the shelf cloud itself is kind of surging out away from the rain, it's slanting away from the rain. Whereas a wall cloud, which we'll get to shortly, might be slanted towards the rain. So here's an example of a shelf cloud from the side. And you know, if you look at it just right, it kind of looks like it's extending towards the ground like a funnel cloud, but you would not see any rotation along a vertical axis. It would just kind of be moving, in this case, from right to left very quickly and not spinning. So shelf clouds, when you're right under them, they can look different from the side. So depending on your vantage point, it can look like a shelf cloud is touching the ground. If there's terrain or trees or buildings blocking your view, it might look like they're extending towards the ground. But again, a shelf cloud, it will not be rotating like a tornado would be. It either wouldn't be rotating or would be rotating horizontally. So the big question is, do you need to report shelf clouds to the Weather Service? Not necessarily, because it's not a direct indicator of severe weather. Now, if there's a severe thunderstorm warning and you see a shelf cloud coming, that might be an indication that the winds behind the shelf cloud could be damaging. But a shelf cloud itself doesn't mean that you're definitely going to have damaging winds. It just means that there's rain-cooled air and gusty winds coming. In severe storms, the shelf cloud might receive damaging winds, but you can get shelf clouds with non-severe storms, I guess is my extremely roundabout point. So moving on from shelf clouds to funnel clouds, wall clouds, and tornadoes. So again, wall clouds and tornadoes, they'll typically form kind of between where the rain's falling out of the thunderstorm and where warm and humid air is still getting pulled into the thunderstorm. That clash is what kind of gets your rotation near the ground to develop that can eventually become a tornado. So again, as we've said several times, the most violent tornadoes come from supercells, and the reason these supercells last so long is because the wind shear keeps the updraft, that's this portion of the storm, separate from this portion of the storm, so it doesn't rain itself out, and it can last quite a long time if conditions are favorable enough. And that updraft in a supercell is rotating. So, here, if you saw some cameras going up, before I go to the next slide. So, again, this is what a supercell looks like on radar, and this is an example of a wall cloud. And if you were looking at this on radar, this would be kind of the rainy portion of the storm would kind of be, so the wall cloud would be right about here. This side of the picture would be this part of the storm, and then the somewhat drier portion of the storm would be wrapping around on this side. So this wall cloud is kind of on the edge of the rain-cooled air, and you can see it's kind of slanting a little bit towards the rain. So a wall cloud, it may be rotating, and that's kind of a telltale sign. So wall clouds form when warm, humid air is getting pulled into a thunderstorm, and it usually means that there's a very intense updraft. You can, in theory, get a wall cloud with a non-supercell thunderstorm if it has a very strong updraft, but usually in those instances, the wall cloud would go away pretty quickly, just because it would start raining itself out quicker. Whereas with supercells, usually that wall cloud will last longer, and usually with supercells, the wall cloud will be rotating. So if you see a non-rotating wall cloud, it probably won't last all that long. But if you see a rotating wall cloud, it's a good indication that you are looking at a supercell thunderstorm, and that can go on to develop into a funnel cloud or a tornado. So here's kind of another very distinct example of a wall cloud as opposed to a shelf cloud. So here's the wall cloud and here's the rain-cooled air on the far side of the image. And you note that the wall cloud is on the edge of the rain-cooled air and the non-rain-cooled air, and it is sloping towards the rain, which is the opposite of a shelf cloud, which will be rushing away from the rain. Yes?
Is it important to know the difference when you make a call and refer this, something like this?
It isn't, I mean, I'll get to this at the end, but at the end of the day, we just want you to tell us what you see or what you think you see. So if you're not sure, just describe what you see. But for us, it is good to know difference between wall cloud and shelf cloud, because a wall cloud, especially if it's rotating, it indicates that we probably have a supercell, so there is a higher tornado risk. Whereas shelf clouds are more common and usually aren't going to develop into a tornado. So it's important to know, yeah, if you're looking at a wall cloud or a shelf cloud. So here's another good example of a wall cloud where it's right on the edge of the rain-cooled air. It's a very well-defined lowering, and the bottom portion of it is actually tailing towards the rain, which would be the opposite of a shelf cloud. A few more examples. Yeah, so here's a good one that kind of shows the difference. So the shelf cloud is rushing away from the rain-cooled air. The wall cloud on this side of the screen towards me is kind of on the edge of the rain-cooled air and the non-rain-cooled air, and it is subtly sloping towards the storm. So in terms of calling these things in, like I said, there's no real need to call in a shelf cloud, but do be aware that winds are probably going to increase when that shelf cloud gets to you. So you might be making a call a few minutes later if those winds do damage, but the shelf cloud itself, you don't need to report to us. Although we do appreciate the pictures of shelf clouds. People like sending those to us, and they are very cool, but you don't need to unless you want to. Wall clouds, though, on the other hand, especially if they're rotating, those are very, very important for us to find out about, because it means that the thunderstorm is rotating. In the rare case, if you can't tell if it's a rotating wall cloud or not, again, if you want to make a report, just tell us what you see and we can interpret it from there. So if you say, I'm looking at a wall cloud, I'm not sure if it's rotating much, that's still good information for us to have. And again, and I'll give all our social media information at the end. But at the end of the day, if you're not sure what you're looking at and you have a smartphone or something, or something that can quickly take a video and send it away on the internet, don't be afraid to send it to us, especially on social media. We're constantly checking that during severe weather operations, trying to figure out what people are seeing. So again, if you're not sure, just feel free to take a picture or video and send it to us, and we can interpret it as we may once we get it. So kind of moving on from wall clouds, which are less serious, to funnel clouds or tornadoes, which are the most serious type of clouds. So basically, your wall cloud may eventually develop into a funnel cloud, which may eventually develop into a tornado. A funnel cloud, and we'll have plenty of pictures, is going to be a really well-defined and smooth lowering out of a wall cloud, and it's going to be spinning like a top. The only difference between a funnel cloud and a tornado is the tornado is on the ground doing damage, the funnel cloud is not. So, and again, the key difference between any of these things and something like a shelf cloud is it'll be spinning and it'll probably be very quick along a vertical axis, whereas with a shelf cloud, it's either not spinning or it'll be doing it along a horizontal axis. So let's get into it. Again, funnel clouds are, it's a rotating column of air. It may be in the process of developing into a tornado, but it's not quite on the ground yet. So funnel clouds, you can usually tell it's a funnel cloud because it's going to be very smooth. it's going to be spinning quickly and it's going to be extending towards the ground. So I've seen a few funnel clouds. Some of them did not go on to produce tornadoes. A couple of them did. You can tell they're going to be spinning very quickly. But usually you can, a funnel cloud, it's not on the ground. However, it could really become a tornado at any time. So funnel clouds, if you see one, definitely report it. Whereas a tornado, the only real difference between a funnel cloud and a tornado, they're going to develop out of the same part of a thunderstorm. The tornado has successfully made it to the ground. So that is probably a very intense tornado. If you ever saw something that imposing, it's not a good day. But again, the big difference is, on the prior slide, the funnel was maybe halfway to the ground. That's all the way on the ground, and it's clearly doing damage. You can see a debris field around it. The good news is only 1 in about 10,000 thunderstorms produce a tornado. So this doesn't happen all that often, but when it does, the damage can be very intense. So if you see something you're not sure if it's a funnel cloud or a tornado, again, just tell us what you see. A lot of times with trees or hills around here, you might not be able to see all the way to the ground. So just describe what you're seeing. And I think, as someone who has to issue or not issue tornado warnings, if someone tells me there's a tornado on the ground versus if someone tells me there's a rotating funnel cloud that may or may not be on the ground, I'm probably going to do the same thing and issue a tornado warning if everything suggests that's what we're looking at. So just tell us what you see, and we can do with it as we need. And kind of touched on this earlier. The amount of damage doesn't necessarily mean it was a tornado or not. Every once in a while, very intense straight line wind damage can look a lot like weak tornado damage. And that's where we go out and look at how things fell to determine if we had a tornado or not. So here's a picture of, I'm going to guess it's a funnel cloud because I don't see any debris under it. I don't see it in contact with the ground, but this is a very threatening looking funnel cloud. So it's kind of hard to see, but it's in the middle of a broader wall cloud and it's extending towards the ground. It's relatively smooth. And I imagine if a funnel cloud looks like that, it would probably be spinning quite a bit. So whereas something like a shelf cloud, or we'll get into it shortly, scud, might be very jagged and wouldn't be nearly as organized. Here's another funnel cloud. This one may be a little bit more discreet, but you can see it does have a relatively smooth edge on both sides. And you can see it's in the middle of a broader wall cloud right here. And you can, even in the picture, just tell kind of, it looks like a corkscrew. That's probably spinning like a top. So that would be a giveaway that it's a funnel cloud. And again, I don't see anything underneath it in terms of debris. So would probably be inclined to call this a funnel cloud instead of a tornado. The only difference, again, is the tornado would be in contact with the ground, because much like that. So honestly, that might be pictures of the same storm a few minutes apart because it looks about the same. But yeah, the only difference between the two is in this one, the funnel cloud is clearly extending all the way to the ground. So at this point, we would call it a tornado instead of a funnel cloud. And again, if you can't see for sure what's going on underneath it, just tell us what you see. We appreciate any good information we can get in a situation like that. So, moving away from things like shelf clouds and wall clouds, funnel clouds, tornadoes, things that may be threatening to things that usually aren't threatening. A lot of times in thunderstorms, you get a lot of low-hanging clouds that might look threatening, but they're not as threatening as the things described above. So a common, we'll say, imposture is what we call SCUD. It stands for scattered cumulus under deck. But it's just these low-hanging clouds underneath the main thunderstorm cloud. And the word SCUD, it's not really a word, it's an acronym, but it's very appropriate for what these are. So the difference between dangerous low-hanging clouds and SCUD clouds are SCUD clouds, they're going to be very disorganized and ragged. They're not going to be rotating in any sort of coherent manner. They'll quickly change character. If you just take a picture of them, they might look concerning because just that picture it's, clouds extending towards the ground under a thunderstorm. But if you looked at it for maybe a minute or two, I'm guessing that would go away or change shape or something to indicate it's not really an organized feature. So SCUD is responsible for a lot of false tornado reports. Again, here's another good example of SCUD. Like all these, I would consider SCUD. These maybe this might be maybe more of a shelf cloud over here coming away from the rain, but these are SCUD. And they're extending, especially over here, under the thunderstorm a little bit towards the ground, but they're just extremely disorganized and they would not be rotating. And that's how you would know that it's nothing to really worry about. Now, where SCUD gets interesting is where, your vantage point or maybe the terrain makes it look like they're in contact with the ground. Again, at first glance, this picture looks like there might be a large tornado on the ground, but it's not. And the way you can tell, even just from this picture, is just these edges are very ragged and disorganized. And if you were watching it in real life, you would probably be able to tell pretty quickly. It's not spinning, it's just moving through. It's just a low cloud. It doesn't really mean anything severe is happening. And again, here's another good example where a combination of maybe the vantage point and the terrain make that SCUD look like it's really close to the ground. It looks like maybe there's a hill over here that's causing that effect. Again, at first glance at a picture, it looks like there might be a large tornado, but the edges are very rough, and if you were looking at this in real life, you would not see rotation in there. So that's how you would know it's low hanging, it's intimidating in a picture, but it's really nothing more concerning than that. So we're going to get to try out these things here over the next few slides. We're going to get to guess what type of cloud we're looking at. So there are your options on top: funnel cloud, tornado, SCUD, wall cloud, shelf cloud. So the feature we're kind of looking at is this thing right here. Now the contrast is a little big. Anyone want to yell out a guess of what that might be? Heard a lot of funnel clouds, and I would be inclined to agree. We can't really tell if it's rotating, but I'll give you the hint that it's probably spinning like a top. And you can tell it's a funnel cloud because it's very smooth, it's well-defined. It doesn't appear to be particularly close to the ground, though, so it's not a tornado. And again, if you saw a funnel cloud like that in real life, you would probably be able to see rotation in it. So that is a funnel cloud. Okay, so up next, any guesses here? And again, the thing to look at is kind of how is it sloped? Is it sloped towards or away from the rain? Shelf. Okay, I'm hearing lots of shelf clouds. And again, I would be inclined to agree. It's sloping away from the rain. It's kind of on the leading edge of the rain cooled air. So it's a shelf cloud. Okay, I didn't even have to give you any hints, everyone. SCUD. Yeah, that's SCUD. And again, like if you caught it out of the corner of your eye when a thunderstorm's coming in, this cloud that's halfway to the ground, yeah, it's cause for concern, but you'll get it a little closer. And that's what SCUD clouds look like underneath. The vantage point can be everything with SCUD. Once you're underneath them, you can really tell that there's really nothing organized going on there. So in this case, it's not rotating, it's very ragged, and it's clearly not touching the ground either. It is SCUD. Yeah, so this is at the very least, this is a picture that I wish I took. Does anyone want to take a guess here at what kind of cloud?
Like a bunch of SCUD.
It is a bunch of SCUD, and again, the same thing. You can tell. Incredibly photogenic, and you maybe get this towards the evening when the air ahead of the thunderstorm is starting to cool off and become more humid. That's how you might get these real low-hanging clouds, but it's nothing severe. Very rough and ragged. You wouldn't see any rotation. It looks like it's close to the ground, but nothing's touching the ground. You're not seeing debris underneath it. It is SCUD. Now, this is a little bit more interesting. So the contrast is, again, hurting us here a little bit, but I'll give you some context. This broad lowering here is, I'll give you a hint, a wall cloud. And then we're gonna really focus on this and what's going on underneath it, so. Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of people say tornado, and it is a tornado, so. Yeah, then this is a little bit unconventional, and you honestly may not see this around here unless you're pretty close to it with all the trees and hills we have, in parts of the area at least, but this is a tornado, and the cloud funnel is not visible all the way to the ground, but you can see the debris getting thrown up underneath it. So in this case, you would call it a tornado. It's touching the ground. It's rapidly rotating. Kind of hard to tell in this picture how smooth or ragged it is, but I'm guessing in real life, if you were looking at the clouds above a tornado, they'd be spinning quite a bit, and the debris is a pretty good giveaway that it's a tornado. So, moving towards the wrap-up portion. So, again, how can you help us? So you kind of know a little more about the weather. You kind of know about what clouds you might be looking for or not looking for. How do you help us? So, basically, if you see something that might be concerning, either one of those clouds or maybe a storm goes through and causes some damage, when it is safe to do so, give us your report, and we'll tell you how to report. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. We'll tell you that towards the last slides, which are coming up pretty quickly. And do it as whenever it's safe to do so. Again, never put yourself in harm's way to report weather to us. But on the flip side, if you see something severe, don't assume we know about it. We can never have too many reports. So basically, the acronym we go for is tell us. Keep that, so basically we need to know the time, the event, or what you're reporting, and the location. So let's get into some of the various ways to report and what you're going to report. So what to report. So if you see, honestly, any hail, we'll take the report. So if you see pea-sized hail, that's fine, report it, but definitely report it if it's penny size or larger, because once it's penny size, it's getting very close to that quarter size severe threshold. Wind gusts greater than or equal to 50 miles an hour. So I believe the next slide has a little bit more on how to maybe estimate wind speeds. Without an anemometer, you can only estimate so well. But a general rule of thumb is if you see any wind damage, once limbs start breaking off, or anything worse than that, there's enough wind going on to go ahead and make a report. We don't need to know if you see a lot of lightning. There's lightning detection networks nowadays are really quite good. We'll know where the strike is within a couple hundred feet, within a few seconds of it happening. But if lightning strikes something and causes damage, that is something that you can report once it does damage. Flooding is good to report, along with especially tornadoes, funnel clouds, or rotating wall clouds. So a little bit more about each type of thing here that you may be reporting. So in terms of hail, it's good to know when it started and stopped and if it's ongoing. So if you saw hail and you're calling us 10 minutes later when it's safe to do so, clarify, hey, it hailed at 8 o'clock or whatever the time was. Or if it's happening now, it's hailing right now, I'm looking at it. Just tell us when. The event, any kind of hail, and don't worry about trying to measure it. Just estimate, closest to common objects like coins or sports balls. We say do not use marbles. Most people know what kind of a typical marble is, a half an inch, but marbles can really vary in size. You can get smaller or bigger. So try to avoid marble, and then tell us where you are specifically. So that's hail, what to report with hail. So again, try to avoid the marble, but any other sports ball or US coin is perfect. So in terms of wind, so any sort of wind damage, again, once it's enough that it's starting to take limbs off trees, that's enough wind damage to go ahead and make a report. Any structural damage, even if it's just shingles, that's enough to make a report. So any damage. Or if you estimate wind speeds more than 50, and I believe the next slide or something like that will have it. So same thing, tell us when, what, and where, tell, T-E-L. And an approximate time is okay. Like if you're at work and you come home from work and a tree is down in your yard, you don't know exactly when it happens, that's fine, just tell us you had a tree down and we can usually figure out what thunderstorm did that. So here's the slide that kind of generally estimates or helps estimate what wind speeds you might be looking at. I believe this is just the Beaufort scale, but it still works. So again, you can kind of tell that anything that isn't starting to break larger branches or limbs off, it should be under 50 miles an hour. So it shouldn't be anything to worry about. So if you think you have winds that may be 50 miles an hour or higher, a good way to tell if you do or not is if you start getting some amount of tree damage. Usually tree damage, at least minor tree damage, starts before you hit that 58-mile-an-hour threshold. So yeah, if a thunderstorm's coming in, you get a good gust of wind. A good way to tell if it's probably approaching severe limits, if not severe, is if you start having tree damage or structural damage. So if you have a lot of trees in your area and nothing falls, it's probably under 50 miles an hour. Did everyone get that who needed it? Okay. Obviously, if you see a tornado or a funnel cloud or a rotating wall cloud, when it's safe to do so, make the report. Again, we don't want you out on your front porch looking at the rotating wall cloud or tornado coming at you so you can report it. We want you taking shelter. But if you do see a tornado and can report it, same thing, when, what you're looking at and where it was. And that might be a case too of, hey, I'm in Worcester looking to the south or north or whatever direction and I see a funnel cloud in that direction. That's good information as well. And then moving away from the severe thunderstorm stuff, the tornadoes, winds, and hail, we do need to know about flooding, because as we touched on earlier, it is one of the biggest killers on average in the United States every year. A good threshold for reporting flooding is there water in areas where there isn't water every time it rains? So we all know there's those areas where it collects every time you get a quick downpour. We don't need to know that some random street corner has a few inches of water in it like it does every time it pours for 5 minutes. But once you get water beyond that, you're like, okay, this is unusual. That's where it's to the point where it's worth a report to us. So beyond that, anytime water is on a road to the point where it's closed, cars can't get through it, or it's getting into homes, businesses, or people's property, that's enough flooding to make a report. So it's a relatively low bar. It's really anytime you have more water than you get every time it rains hard. And once it gets to the point of being unusual. And again, when is it occurring? What are you reporting, and where is it happening? Same thing. We would like you to tell us. So again, you don't need to report that there's a lot of lightning. We know there's a lot of lightning, and lightning is dangerous. That's why we don't want you necessarily outside looking for these things coming in. But if lightning strikes something and does damage, be it a tree or a home or business or even a car, something like that, or if there's someone injured by it, that is something that's worth reporting. So again, any sort of damage reported, but otherwise we don't need lightning-related reports. So again, this is just a nice, quick little wrap-up slide, and I believe the next slide we have all our various ways to report. But again, any wind damage, or if you're estimating gusts more than 50, flooding once it's to the point where it's like more than normal, if that makes sense. It's more than just your big puddles that happen. Hail, or barely any hail is good to report, but definitely penny-sized or larger. Avoid marble. Any sort of rotating wall cloud, funnel cloud, or tornado. And again, with all of these things, if you're not sure what you're looking at and you can snap a picture of it, again, don't, tell us what you see and we can interpret it. And if you have a picture, that can only help. So this is something we post on social media quite frequently when we're trying to seek out reports, but it's a nice little summary of what to maybe look for in a report and what to include in those reports. So, how to report. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. It's actually the next couple of slides. So, I believe this is on the handouts. We do have an unlisted spotter phone number. I do have a limited number of spotter cards. We don't make them anymore because we used to give them out with a number, but if you would like a spotter card to put in your wallet, I do have a limited number of stuff that's going to be again. But that unlisted number, that rings straight through to our ops floor that I showed you a picture of early on. I would say if you're seeing something in real time and you want us to get that report immediately, that is the quickest way to do it, is to call that unlisted number, that 800 number, because someone sitting 5 feet away from the person on radar is going to pick up the phone. So it's quick for you, quick for us. But other good ways are Twitter or Facebook. We usually have at least one person dedicated to, at least on bigger severe weather days, literally just monitoring for reports on social media. So especially if you tweet directly at us, we'll see it quickly. Facebook, if you maybe make a comment under a recent post, we'll see it pretty quickly. I would say Twitter is slightly more efficient than Facebook, but we'll see both pretty quickly because we're on there directly. And then this email address, stormplea@noaa.gov. The only drawback there is we're probably not checking it in the heat of the moment in severe weather. We're probably checking it after. So you're welcome to make reports on there, especially if it's something that you maybe see hours or days later. More than welcome to email reports there, but if it's really time sensitive, like it's happening now, you want us to get the report, it's not the best option. And then, again, online, there's additional ways to report. So if you go to our website, weather.gov/CLE, and then on the right-hand side, there's a tab, Local Programs. If you scroll down to Submit a Storm Report, and you click it, it'll take you to an interface where you can put in all the information, where you are, what you're reporting, and when it happened. So this is also a pretty quick way. It's just as immediate.
The library closes in 30 minutes. Computers on the left.
We'll be done by then, I promise. So, and I can say along with calling us, this is very immediate as well. So as soon as someone hits send report through that online portal, we all get bright purple banners on our workstation. So it's very immediate. So that's another extremely quick way to get a report to us. And then I know it's already been mentioned a couple of times, but if you are a part of the amateur radio network, on bigger severe weather days, I would say anytime we have a severe thunderstorm or tornado watch issued for more than a couple counties in our coverage area, a lot of times we're calling in a ham radio operator, and they're just taking these reports that are coming into all the various ham radio districts at various times, and immediately they're on the ops floor with us, telling us what they're hearing. So I would say the most instantaneous ways are the phone call, that 800 number, the online portal, or ham radio are all very instantaneous. And then Twitter and Facebook, we should be routinely monitoring it, so that'll be nearly instantaneous as well. And then the email is kind of the slower option. Maybe if you see something later and would like us to see it or take a look at it. So does anyone, real quick before we wrap up, just a couple slides after this, have any questions on how to get reports to us, or what to report, or anything along those lines? Yes?
2 weekends ago, we had that whole rain.
Yeah.
I was driving on 30 West. You could see the like quick floods coming out of the fields.
Yeah.
Some of them were actually breaking over the berm into Route 30. It wasn't standing water, but is that something that you would report?
I would say, yeah, if water from fields is getting out to roadways, yes. And I can say that when we had all that rain a couple of weeks ago, I don't know if we issued it all the way into Wayne County, but definitely to the west, we had a flood advisory out, and we did have reports of some flooding on roadways. So if there's water from like fields getting onto roadways, like that's not what I would consider. Like when I say big puddles, I think of, you have those intersections where water naturally collects. So whenever it pours, there's like 4 or 6 inches of water. that's a big puddle, but anything more unusual than that, I think you're fair game to report. And the thing with flooding is it can quickly go from a little bit of extra water to legitimate flooding if it's still pouring. So, you can err on the side of reporting if you're ever on the fence, if that makes sense. Yes.
To say something that, there was roads closed off of 30.
Yeah.
They actually,
Yeah. So closed roads definitely is
they
worth
did
it. Yeah.
close a bunch of them off of 30.
Okay. Yeah. So and obviously, if roads are to the point where even if it's not closed, if cars shouldn't be going through it, that's definitely more than enough. Okay. So there are other ways to track weather and give information both to us, but broadcast meteorologists, really anyone who's looking. One of those ways is COCORAS. This is a network of volunteer observers. They measure rainfall and snowfall every day. So if you really like tracking the weather and you're curious about this, feel free to look into it. Right now we have a big banner on our homepage for COCORAS, so you can just click there, or just, I don't know if there's an email address on here. There isn't, but something to look into. The next slide has an email address. So if you're at all interested in COCORAS, email Zachary Sefcovic@noaa.gov. He runs that program for our office. And this is very, especially in winter, when we're trying to figure out how much snow fell, can be very helpful to us. But also rainfall amounts help as well. And then another one, and this is very easy. This is just an app.